Okay, well, hello everyone. I'm seeing folks in the chat saying hi. Um, Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Erica Marciak. I'm the Dean of the Strome College of Business, and it is my pleasure today to open the webinar Leadership in Action, a conversation with Tim Toll. The Strome Insights webinar series is designed to highlight and support the excellent work of our faculty, students, and alums, while also bridging the gap between academia and the business community. At Strome, we're committed to fostering conversations that connect research, real-world business challenges, and leadership insights. And in particular, for those leadership insights, we are honored to welcome our guest, Tim Toll, an esteemed ODU alumnus and an accomplished executive with more than 4 decades of leadership experience in the consumer goods and health industries. His exceptional journey from playing professional baseball to leading top organizations like Innovate Health Sciences, the Campbell Soup Company, and Kraft Heinz offer valuable lessons in leadership, adaptability, and strategic decision making. On the ODU academic side, leading today's discussion is Dr. Jay O'Toole, an associate professor of management in the Strome College of Business. And Dr. O'Toole brings extensive expertise in entrepreneurship, organizational strategy, and leadership, making him the perfect moderator for this conversation. Before we begin, I'll just share a quick reminder that your participation is encouraged. Jay is going to share how he will manage questions when he takes the helm in a moment. All microphones are muted to minimize distractions, but that does not mean that you cannot participate. A special thank you both to Tim and Jay for sharing their time and expertise today, all of you as well for joining us. We appreciate your engagement and we look forward to a great discussion. And with that, let's get started. Please, everyone, join me in welcoming Tim Toll and Dr. Jay O'Toole. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dean.
Thank you, Dean Marciak. Well, a quick note of housekeeping to start. If anyone has questions throughout this conversation, there should be a Q&A option at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please go ahead and throw questions in there at any time. We'll do Q&A towards the end of the conversation, but if I see questions that pop up, I'll certainly try to include them in our conversation. But I am just incredibly excited to talk to Tim today. As Dean Marciak said, he just brings this just incredible wealth of experience and perspective from a really fascinating career. And with that being said, Dean Marciak gave us a brief overview, but that two-dimensional view does not necessarily create the three-dimensional picture of that trajectory, Tim. I was wondering if maybe you could just take just a little bit of time, talk to us about your career trajectory. Did everything go as planned? Were there any pivotal moments in your career arc?
Sure. Let me just start out with just a little bit about myself, and then I'll get into my career. I graduated from Old Dominion a long time ago, so 4 decades is about right. I went to Old Dominion on a baseball scholarship, so I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I am a long lost Cleveland sports fan, so usually on Sundays I'm pretty miserable. My parents were European, and I was the only child. So my mother at that time had me when she was 48 years old, and my dad was 49. And the reason I share this is it's all part of my leadership story that I'll get into in a second. Um, I my career, as the dean shared, I went to school on a baseball scholarship. My focus was on business administration and marketing. And when I finished my baseball career, I was fortunate to get a role at Procter and Gamble. And when I was in college, some of the professors there really helped shape me in what I was trying to do. And the one company that really stood out from many of the case studies that I participated in was Procter and Gamble. And I leveraged my network to get an interview. I started my career in Philadelphia, moved to Buffalo, then moved to Cincinnati, then moved back to Cleveland, then moved to Arkansas, and then moved to Pittsburgh. And then finally, we settled in Philadelphia and have been here for about 22 years. After I left P&G, I needed to get closer to home and worked for the H.A. Heinz company for a little while. And then one of my bosses from P&G recruited me to Campbell Soup and was there for 11 years in a variety of assignments on the Walmart business and then international. And then I had a chance to go out to the West Coast for 8 years and get into the vitamin business. I was the chief customer officer for the number one vitamin company called Pharmavite and led the transformation there. And then I had two CEO roles, one with another vitamin company called Irwin Naturals. And we really focused on partnering with JP Morgan to sell it. And then for the last 4 years, I was with Iovate, which is a leader in the sports nutrition company and was headquartered in Toronto. So I've had a diversity of experience, some good, some not so good. But I certainly owe a lot to Old Dominion and my time there for helping guide me and giving me the opportunities that I had during a 40-year career.
When you, I mean, you talked about, being a baseball player on campus, but having these professors too who are introducing you to case studies like about P&G. Did you envision that arc? Like, did you think, oh, when you left here that it would be that path?
Um, no, when I use this when I talk to new employees too, because I think when you are in college or you're in grad school or whatever, you have this grandiose idea of what your career is going to be. And mine, I kind of thought was going to be, like this from a baseball perspective and like this from a business perspective. I quickly learned that my fastball wasn't fast enough and my changeup was too fast. So my baseball career kind of petered out, and I needed to kind of go figure out what was the next thing that I wanted to do. And just in life, life has ups and downs. Your career is going to have ups and downs. And you're going to experience things with different companies and different roles. And the key thing that I learned is, really understanding what I'm good at, who and how I want to be connected with companies based on what their purpose was, what they're trying to do in the broader sense. And am I going to grow? Am I going to continue to grow as a business person? And those when I'm in those situations, that's when I did the best. And the analogy that I use is, you want to look at your career like a rubber band, and you want to be put in positions where you're stretched, and you never go back to the business person that you were, 6 months ago, a year ago. You want to constantly be in environments where you're learning, you're growing, and you're getting, learning from your management and your peers that you're working with. I talk a lot in analogies, and the another analogy that I use is, you know, being an employee is like being a plant, and you want to be watered, you want sunshine, you want fertilizer, and that's how you grow. And that's how you're allowed to get to new opportunities, get promoted, and finding that environment is so important.
I love those analogies. The rubber band one is not one that I've heard before, but I really like that idea of, stretching yourself and really helping you grow. But then even as you relax that rubber band is never going to go back to that same small.
Exactly.
I mean, you're growing every time you get stretched. I hope you don't mind if I steal that and share that in my classes.
Jay, just to build off of that, there's been parts of my career where I've had that based on the individuals that I worked for. And there's been times where I didn't have that. And, as students are looking for opportunities, in the real world, that should be some of the things that, they test the waters on to make sure that the environment that they're going to be in is going to be something that will allow them to grow and continue to reach, whatever career goals they have.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. That definitely a message worth sharing over and over. As an instructor, something that we try to do all the time too. When we had the opportunity to chat last week briefly too, I was really struck with one of the stories that you shared when you were meeting with Campbell's, and you weren't. if I remember correctly, you weren't really set on leaving Procter. You were Procter and Gamble at the time, if I remember. I think everyone would benefit from hearing that story if you don't mind sharing that.
Sure. Until that point, I had a great career. I mean, I was married. I didn't talk about my personal situation, but I've been married to my wife, who's an Old Dominion graduate. We've been married for 37 years. I had two kids. I have a daughter, Taylor, and a son, Will, and they were young. So my daughter was like, 5 or 6. My son was, 2 or 3, somewhere in that range. I told the story about my mom because my father had passed away when I was in school, and my mom was spending a lot of time with us, and so we were growing as a family, and we certainly had challenges dealing with my mom and that kind of stuff. And my boss at the time at Procter left and went to Campbell Soup. And at that time, Campbell's was a troubled company. It kind of lost its way a little bit, and its stock price was suffering. And my boss was calling and said, "Hey, we really would like you to join. We got a great role for you." And I kind of blew him off for a little bit. I said, I really need to stay with where I'm at, and wasn't looking to really leave. And he called a few times. A recruiter called that he was working with a few times. And he said, "Hey, why don't you meet our CEO? He's a pretty special guy." At that time in my life, I was late 30s, early 40s. Hadn't really met too many Fortune 500 CEOs. And I said, "What the heck? I'll get on a plane and spend time with him." Also spent time with some of the C-suite executives. And it really was an amazing experience. And I share this with people because it's a clear indication of leadership on a very personal level that I use every day. And what happened in that interaction had a huge impact in me personally, financially, as well as set me up for the rest of my career. And I went to Philadelphia, or I went to Camden, New Jersey, where our headquarters is. If you know Campbell's at the time, it was like going to a high school. It wasn't an impressive campus. And I went to his office, and Doug was a very formal guy. He was, dressed to the nines. But we spent literally over 2 hours, 2.5 hours talking about what do you want your legacy to be in your life and your career. And at that time, I wasn't even sure if I knew what a legacy was. And I left there saying, "Oh my gosh, that was like the most impactful, 2 hours I think I've ever spent with anyone." And so I was still saying I'm probably not going to come, but I was very appreciative of the time that he spent with me, and helped me think about my life and career much differently. I flew home. On my stoop was a book, and I actually have the book here because I keep it. It was a hardback book with a letter from our CEO, and the CEO said, "Hey, I really enjoyed our conversation. I hope you'll come to Campbell Soup and help me rewrite the next 150 years of the company." And he talked in the letter, which I still have there, some of the legacy points that we were discussing. And that was amazing. And then I came in my office and he called me. How he got my number, I don't know, but he called me on my cell phone and he said, "Are you coming?" And I hadn't talked to my wife. My mom was living with us. I didn't talk to anyone. And I said yes. And so I had some selling to do at home, but I said yes. And next thing you knew, we were on our way to live in Philadelphia or outside Philadelphia. And it certainly wasn't roses, but the one thing that Doug did that I'm forever grateful is he kept his commitment to me on helping me grow as a business person. And that rubber band analogy was extremely, it happened literally every day. We would go on trips to Walmart, and sometimes it was just me and him on the plane. And he didn't ask me questions about the business at the time. He asked me questions about how I was growing my leadership capabilities and how I was interacting with my team and other executives. So it was a very important part of my career, and really set me up and gave me the skills and confidence to do major things that I thought really wasn't going to happen in my career.
Appreciate you sharing that story again with me, but everyone else too. Um, I think it's just so powerful. Talking about writing the next 150 years of history. Um, something that we teach in our capstone strategy course is, it's talking about how do companies set visions and thinking about, long-term visions. We're not talking about 2, 3 year goals. We're talking about long-term. What is the core purpose of the organization, where their values reside, but also how does that impact the long term? One of the things that I think is a challenge, especially when teaching, and I'm hoping you can share with our students, but I think also for everyone else here who's watching today and watching in the future, is the difference between what leadership is like when you're in the field, which you've certainly had tremendous experience, lots of excellent opportunities at P&G and elsewhere, and then what leadership is like when you're in the C-suite or boardroom. I mean, I know you sit on 3 boards right now. Can you just talk a little bit about those experiences and some of the similarities and differences between leadership in the field versus leadership, at the C-suite and really at the upper echelon level?
Sure. When I was in the field, I was I was based. My first assignment was in Philadelphia, and and I was there for 2 years, and then we moved to Buffalo. And I remember this really clearly. I used to think the folks in Cincinnati, which was our corporate office, uh, could do no wrong. They wore better suits than I did. They certainly talked more professional than I did at the time, and I really admired them. As I got a little more experience, I realized that they weren't always right, but everyone followed them. And this whole notion of are you in the movie or are you watching the movie kind of was a mantra that and I saw what was happening to some of their directives and how it related to our customers, our consumers, our share in the marketplace. And I said, no way, that's the wrong decision. But I didn't have a voice. And at that time in the 80s, it was a challenge to be heard in the field. And I kind of said to myself, you know what? I don't want to watch the movie. I want to be in the movie. I want to find a way to elevate my game so that I can be part of the decision making, be part of the strategic direction, whatever business that I was associated with, that we could, drive an agenda that would be successful. And this whole notion of are you in the movie or are you watching the movie? I didn't want to watch the movie anymore. I wanted to be in the movie, leading people, leading strategy, and making sure that the plans that we were putting in place were going to be successful.
I imagine too, like, when you're in the field, you're leading your team, and your team is one, part of the whole movie too. Whereas when you move to the executive level, you're in the movie, but you're also watching all these different parts. And could you talk a little bit about kind of like how leadership changes when you're managing maybe your team and what you learned during that early stage of your career versus, thinking of what leadership means to you now?
Sure. And that's evolved. I will tell you the one thing that I did learn is, leadership is an art, it's a craft. And you can't just say, I want to be a leader or I want to be good at leadership. You have to, if you want to lead an organization, a team of 5 people, 10 people, 500 people, you have to really study and you have to say, what is my leadership philosophy? And so I'll tell you, I was part of when I went to Cincinnati. I was part of a group that got to restructure the organization, And we went from geography to customer teams. And we studied different leadership practices. And if you put on the slide, if you don't mind, the enable, enroll, energize one, my whole philosophy that I learned during my time at Procter was around this notion. And it was you enroll the organization in a vision of the future and where you wanted it to go with clear financial objectives, clear strategies, and getting everyone to buy in. Then really good leaders are part of the team. They're enabling the organization to do more than they thought that they ever could. You're breaking down barriers. You're helping them, understand how to put plans against the strategies. But you're in it. You're helping them, define the direction that they need to go. And the last piece is you're there with them. You're energizing them. You're getting them excited about the future. And every job that I had really until probably I became 50 years old was centered around these three things: enroll, enable, and energize. And I learned how to do it. I did it well. I would go into businesses, and when I got to Campbell's, it was a troubled company. So most of the companies that I went with after my time at P&G, had issues. We would say they had hair on them. And my job was to figure out what were the trouble spots, what were the seams to grow, and how are we going to grow it. And I use this model effectively. And but what I learned is my leadership philosophy had to grow. And so if you turn the page, I'll share a little bit about that. Um, so where it is today is a little bit different, and you still use those three E's. But this whole notion of self-reflection, balanced life, true self-confidence, and genuine humility is how my leadership philosophy really changed. And this whole notion of self-reflection is, to me, probably one of the most important things that I learned my time at Pharmavite and other roles that I had. But every day I journal and I spend time assessing my performance on my values, my personal mission statement, my business mission statement, how I want to be perceived as a manager or as a leader. And I look at the meetings that I went to as a CEO. Your schedule's crazy busy. So I had my assistant block out, the first 30 minutes of every day. And that's what I did, is said, all right, how did I do? Um, and and I was really, really critical on myself. The other piece that I did is I set really, really clear priorities. So, for me, my priorities are around my faith, my family, my health, and then work. And so work wasn't my number one priority. But if I'm not talking to my kids every day, if I'm not, and my kids were in college or they were starting their lives, we still talk every day. If I'm not spending time, doing the things that I think are important to make me a well-rounded person, if I'm not working out every day, I'm not an effective leader. So this whole notion of self-reflection became incredibly important to making me an effective leader. This second piece is about balanced life, and I learned this during some time I was at Northwestern, but there's 168 hours in a week. And if I say the people in the organization are important and I never leave my office, that's not being a very transparent leader. If I say strategy is what we're going to focus on as a leader, and we're not, driving, and talking about strategy most of the time, then I'm not being a very effective leader. If I say values are important, I'm not being a very effective leader. And if I don't, bring values to the center of the conversations. But this whole notion of balanced life is making sure that if I say my family is important, my faith is important, and I do nothing during the day, if I say health and wellness and I'm not working out, then I'm not leading a very balanced life. And for myself, I found when I didn't lead a very balanced life, I made mistakes. I wasn't true to myself and I wasn't a very transparent leader. The third piece is about true self-confidence. When you're a leader, when you're a CEO or you're leading a division, it's a lonely job. And this whole notion of true self-confidence really became important to me. And as a CEO, there's tons of pressure. You have pressure from the board, you have pressure from customers, you have pressure to hit financial targets. But this whole notion of true self-confidence, the mantra is, I'm going to do the best job God-given ability I can do, and I'm always going to do what's right. And if I have that in the forefront of every decision I make when I go into the office or any situation that I'm in, the pressure of the work goes away. At least for me, it did. Because I know I'm going to do the best job I possibly can, and I'm always going to do what's right. I'm not going to, compromise my ethics. And that helped me drive an agenda with purpose and made me very transparent as a leader because the organization knew that he was going to always do the right thing, and that was never going to be compromised. The last piece is this whole notion of genuine humility. And what I mean by that is, as a leader, you have a chance to touch an individual, touch a group in a really positive way around your values, around your strategies, and just make them connected better to the company. And many leaders forget that. They'll walk the hallways, they won't acknowledge an individual, they won't ask how their weekend was. And it doesn't matter if you're the security guard, you're my assistant, or you're my CFO. I want to know about you. I want to genuinely care about you as an individual and help you understand your role in the greater, good of the company. And I think the more you can do that, the more that people go to bat for you, and you'll build a sense of camaraderie. As a leader of anything, you're going to be judged on how you connect with people and how you're able to motivate people and to do the things that they need to do to build the business. You're also going to be, if you're ineffective at that, you're going to be an ineffective leader. And so this whole notion of touching people in a way that makes them committed to the greater good of the company, I think is so important and is really if you look at companies and teams that do well over time, that's one of the things that I think they do really, really well.
Thanks for sharing, Tim. Well, kind of a follow-up question about, you talked about the trajectories of people's careers, your own career. It's not linear. There are ups and downs. The things you've learned over time in terms of some of these lessons, what are the things that you found help bring you back to those key lessons of leadership? Because, as you said, like when you have all these stakeholders putting pressure on you, including some in your personal life at times, right? I mean, talk about living with your mother, and you got to grapple with those things while at the same time you're trying to, focus on other things. What have you found for you that's kind of brought you back and grounded you in some of those leadership philosophy and those principles, and when you feel like, oh, wait, am I still grounded here?
Um, you know, it's a couple things. When I uh, have any new employee join, I'm really transparent about who I am. What are my values? What are my priorities? How I live my life? And and I ask them to if I'm not consistent with that, I say, call me out on it. You have permission to call me out on it because my intention is to be, really consistent with the way that I want to come across. And so those values, um, you know, I, I I really hold dear to me in how I make decisions and how I try to live my life. I'm a really disciplined person. So, my time playing baseball, you have certain times that you have to study, you have certain times that, you have to dedicate to baseball, and that has carried me well throughout. I'm really, my kids probably, if they're on here, will think I'm really, really anal about certain things. And I and so when I'm inconsistent with that, it helps me bridge the gap. And I know I'm not doing the best job that I possibly can. One of the quotes that I got from Doug Conan, I'll share it with you. You can't talk your way out of something you behaved your way into. You have to behave your way out of it. And so to me, when the business goes awry or you go awry, you can't say I'm going to fix it. That's not going to, you need to fix it now, and you need to make sure that you're approaching it, day in, day out. So if my values are inconsistent, um, I hope I call myself out through this whole notion of self-reflection, but I also hope that people that are close to me will do it as well. I know my kids will.
Kids are great at that. They're
Yeah.
very good at that. Yeah, I love that, hearing that you can't talk your way out of something you behaved your way into.
And so, like one of the things around, we talked about some of the soft things around leadership, but any business, you're there to make money for your company, or you're there to get the stock price up, and whatever the objectives that you have for whatever business that you're in. And so, many, I have 40 years under me, but many leaders that would say, okay, we're going to fix this. But they didn't understand, some of the issues with the company are deep, deep, seated. And so you have to peel that onion to find out what's the core of our issue. Is it people? Is it process? Is it, a way we go to market? And so you have to develop the plan and then work the plan. And so it's so important around, being an effective leader is also generating results, promises made, promises kept. And as you grow in your career and you get higher and higher and have less ownership of the actual work, you really do have to influence with honor, make sure that, people understand what is the work that they're doing and associated with the goals that you have established.
Thanks for that. The other, I wanted to say something that resonated with me personally is, when losing, or at least feeling like, am I grounded still? The idea that, which with each new employee, that you share that vision again, you share that value, and it's a way to not just share that with them, but ground yourself. And the reason I'm sharing this is really important. I imagine as an executive too, like you said, you're getting further and further away from execution of what needs to be done. But sharing that vision with everyone helps them understand how that's going to happen through this transparency. Um, when we chatted last week too, you gave the analogy of the lighthouse. Um, and I think that resonated with me a lot too. So wondering if maybe you could share a little bit about kind of that lighthouse model of leadership.
Sure, I will. But one of the things, and the reason why I take time in the initial meeting, or even in an interview when I know I'm going to hire someone, is to go over who I am, as it builds trust.
Mm.
And what trust, once you have trust with an individual, your ability to motivate them, your ability to manage them, your ability to lead them is so much easier, because they believe in you, they believe in, and if you give them the power to say, hey, if I'm inconsistent with that, call me out, then all of a sudden they're saying, hey, I'm in the game, I'm in the movie. Our movie might be pretty small, but I'm in the movie. And what I found is that really, really is instrumental in building folks who want to be part of your team. Why don't you put the lighthouse thing in, and I'll share that. This I learned from a COO at Walmart named Don Soderquist. Don passed a few years ago, many years ago, but I had a chance to work with him, and I have this in my office, everywhere that I've gone. And the whole notion of this, which I think is really important, in how you lead organizations, and I'm from Cleveland originally, so I'll use Lake Erie as an example. I know you're in Wisconsin or were born in Wisconsin, so maybe Lake Michigan or is more appropriate. But anyway, in Lake Erie, if you're a lighthouse on Lake Erie and you're blinking, you're constantly blinking like this. And if all of a sudden you, and the purpose of a lighthouse is to make sure the ships don't, run into the rocks. And all of a sudden, if you start blinking really, really fast or don't blink at all, the ships don't know where to go. And so then some of them will eventually crash. And this whole notion of a lighthouse from a leadership philosophy, um, I found to be really, really important. And I certainly use it, and I evaluate my direct reports and how well they can do this. But the values is the bottom of the lighthouse, and that's the foundation, and it really is what makes you a strong leader. It gives you the right to um, communicate to your team, to challenge your team. But if those values are weak or they're inconsistent, the lighthouse will crumble. So your values and how you communicate your values and live your values day in, day out is the base of the lighthouse. Your faith is what you believe in. So, from a business standpoint, from a greater good standpoint, from a mission of the company, but it's what you believe in. And are you consistent with that? And do people follow you based on your faith? Your character is who you are. So it is how you behave. Well, your character is who you are. It's how you are perceived by the organization, and it's how you act day in, day out. And your behavior is how you act. And so the whole notion of a lighthouse is, these four areas help make sure that the light to the organization is shining consistent. So the tempo of the light is very, very consistent. And the reason why that's important is if you come in with your hair on fire into the office and start yelling at people, um, the organization freezes and they don't know how to react. They say, "Oh, did I do something wrong? Am I going to get fired?" And that happens. I've had bosses who do that. And what I found is, over time, if they do that, I certainly lose respect for them. But if you do this and you're consistent, and either in good times or bad times, and if you're going to be around for 40 years, you're going to have both. You've got to handle the good and bad with a very clear messaging in a way that gets people to understand what's going on, but you do that in a way that drives commitment to the goals that needed to be happen for the day, and doesn't freak the organization out. I found this to be so important to building a positive culture and creating leaders of the future, because if they can communicate their values, their faith, how their character interacts, and be able to be consistent in their behavior, their team, their organization, the people that they work with are going to be in a really good spot.
You know, along those lines, so I mean, some really great advice there for those in the audience listening. Y- You know, if you could elaborate on some more of that advice, I think. We have a lot of ODU students who I know we're interested in hearing you talk today, and we have early young professionals, even later stage professionals who want to move into executive experiences. What advice would you have for them if they want to have similar leadership experiences that you've had in throughout your career?
Sure. I'm gonna start with another analogy, so forgive me. But uh, early on when I was at Proctor, when I left Old Dominion, I was basically a jock that did fairly well in school. I certainly didn't have some of the professional acumen that you needed to be successful at P&G. I worked hard, And people were getting promoted ahead of me. And I was saying, wow, like I don't understand why they're getting promoted ahead of me. We're in the same class. My results, my financial results are better than theirs. And someone shared this with me, and the analogy is like marriage. Employment's like marriage. And I've been fortunate to be married for 37 years. It'll be 38 in April. And through those 38 years, you have things that you have to communicate. And so, whose career is going to go first, what house you're going to buy, who's going to do the dishes that night, how many kids you want, what religion you want to raise your kids. And for some, they can't figure that out and, they end up splitting up. Fortunate for us, we've been able to communicate, and sometimes I win those, sometimes I don't, but at the end of the day, we're, aligned with, the greater good of what we're trying to do as a family. So that analogy is really similar to employment. And so the first thing that you've got to do is say, what do you want out of this relationship called employment? What is it that you want? Where do you want to be today? Where do you want to be 5 years from now? Where do you want to be 10 years from now? Really good organization, ask those questions. Poor organizations don't ask those questions. And so being able to articulate, one, what do you want? And if you want to be the CEO in 20 years, what are the competencies that I need to have to get to that CEO job? If you want to be a division leader or a unit leader or whatever that is, what are the competencies, experiences that I need? And are you getting those? And if you're not getting those at your current employer, that's an issue. But the first thing you got to do is articulate, what do you want out of this relationship called employment? It's the same as a marriage. And many people go 20 years and they say, wow, I'm doing the same thing that I did 20 years ago. And that's a crime in managing your career, in my opinion. And I was fortunate that, and then all of a sudden I said, I want to be in the movie. So I don't want to be the guy that executes stuff. I want to be the guy that leads stuff. And so I was really, really clear on what I wanted out of this relationship, called employment. And sometimes my employer would say, Tim, that's great that you want to do that. You might not be able to do it here. And maybe the pyramid was too small. Maybe there was other people who, did a better job than I did. I question that now, but that's okay. I was okay with that because, one, I did the best job I could with my God-given talent, and I did what was right. And then I needed to say, okay, so maybe I either had a decision to make. Either I'm going to have to go somewhere else, or I'm going to have to do what I'm doing now for an extended period of time. And that might have been okay as well. So in some places I stayed a little longer than I probably should have or wanted to. And that's okay too. But this whole notion of, one, being able to communicate, and two, having real conversations with your employer. The other thing that I would say is you need to read everything. Like if students aren't reading the Wall Street Journal every day, Financial Times every day, if they're not reading books on leadership or business every day, and think, if you got 168 hours in a week, where are you spending your time? We used to go to the 4400 Club when I was in college, and that was certainly, I certainly spent some of my parents' money there. But in hindsight, I wish I was smarter, and I wish I would have really understood where I wanted to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and set my sights on the skills and competencies that I needed. The last thing that I would tell you around that, which is probably the most important, is you need to build a network. The time to build a network, and when you realize that you need a network, is when you have to lean on it. And so I was fortunate enough to build a really broad network, and I still lean on my network today. I have probably literally 100 people that I talk to in some way, shape, or form uh, once every month, basically. And some of them are much more successful than I am, and others are just very influential in my thinking that I lean on. But I I'm constantly leaning on that network, and constantly getting their advice. I'm going to go into a CEO role as an interim CEO next week, and it's just going to be but I really leaned on my network to say, do I really want to do this, and do I have the energy to do it, and I think I have the skills and competencies, but a big piece of being a CEO is just the energy, and they help me make the right decisions. So I'm the network is one you have to work at, and you have to constantly weed and feed on who you have in that network and how you're going to use them.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that too. One of the, along with the reading and the network, I remember when I was an undergraduate, uh, being given the book "Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty," I think it was called, and all about if you're building a network, you need to start before you actually need it. And then it's an ongoing process. Of course, also going along the lines of given a book when I was an undergrad to say, keep reading. You need to keep reading throughout your career. Of course, as an educator, I want to hammer that one home too. Um,
Jay, the other thing that I'll say is, like, if you want to go work at, let's say, Hershey, as an example, Hershey's down the street from us. And one of the questions that came from one of the students was, how do I, get myself focused on getting a job in my career? You have to look at your network and say, wow, who do I know that can get the door open for me at Hershey? If I don't know someone, is there a family member? Is there a friend? Is there someone in my LinkedIn contacts that can open the door? Because writing a letter to Hershey or Campbell's or whoever is a really tough way to find a job. That usually is going to get you a zero as far as attention. So someone's got to, and so that's the strategic approach that you've got to, list 100 people that you've got, and start to build that network. And if you got five, that's okay, but hold yourself accountable to try to get 10, in a month or 20, and eventually you'll get 100. And then one of those folks, might be able to open a door for you at Hershey or wherever.
You mentioned too. I mean, some of these folks in your network you talk to pretty regularly. I want to make sure I leave a little bit of time for Q&A. So anyone in the audience, please feel free to add questions to the Q&A. But just kind of along those lines, but also a little bit lighter here. Do you have a fondest memory from your time at ODU? I know you played baseball. Is there something you would want to share with the students, both just fun, but also it was fun and it's been a part of my life.
Well, Old Dominion's has been a huge part of my life, and one, I met my wife there, so I'm grateful for that. Two, my baseball time was incredible. Um, I have great friends that I talk to weekly that are great friends of mine, and are very connected to our family. Some of them are my godparents and my kids. So the friendships that I had, and building my family was certainly connected with Old Dominion. Um, the things that I learned though, one is, teamwork. I was from the Midwest, and, first time that I really was around, people from the South or people from the country. So diversity of thought is one that was super important to me. Teamwork, discipline. As I mentioned, I'm incredibly disciplined in how I approach my day. Even though I'm retired, I still get up at 5:30 for some ungodly reason, and and but it's all part of who I am, and part of my story. So all those things, I certainly learned and were part of my growing at Old Dominion. I also had some really good professors, and I shared with you. I had two to come to mind. One was really instrumental in my understanding of P&L management, and to this day, I still remember how he drilled P&L management into my head. Number two, from a marketing standpoint and brand management, which helped me get excited about joining Procter.
Thanks. So with the few remaining minutes we have, got some questions coming in, and wanted to ask you a few of those at least. One
Sure.
that just came in that I think is an important one. During the job search process, how can you identify a good leader at a potential new job? Are there questions that you ask or things that you do when you're doing your job search?
So that's a really easy question because I asked it to everyone. This is a pet peeve of mine, especially for people that are going to report to me. So this is maybe not, right out of college where I wouldn't expect a robust answer, but, I want to know what's your leadership story and what's your leadership philosophy. And if they don't have one, or if they give me some cockamamie answer, they're out. And I mean that. And they could have the best results, but I want people who can articulate their leadership journey and their leadership journey starts when they were little because their life story is their leadership journey. And so one is, there's assessments on leadership that we give. There's tons of those. But I want someone to really be able to articulate their leadership philosophy to me. And if it's not fully crafted, if you're going to be a C-suite officer, that's a problem for me, a big problem.
One thing that, and please disagree with this if you feel differently. I try to remind my students that an interview is also an opportunity for you as a person being interviewed to interview the company you're working for, to interview the supervisor you might be working directly under. If you flip that, right? So when you're asking people about their leadership styles, is it okay for a candidate to ask the person who's interviewing them about their leadership experience and style? Or might I, if I was coming to work with you, Tim, might I want to ask about questions that would give me insight into to you as a leader and then how I might be developed?
So I think it's totally fair game.
Okay.
And a person who is doing the interview, if they would disagree with that, I would question, how they think about people in their organization. So, one, I do think it's fair game. And if you want to, go back to that rubber band analogy, if you want to grow, you want somebody who, has the same value structure as you do. So if that doesn't come out and you want to work for a company that, using that plant analogy, that's going to feed you, water you, give you sunshine so you can grow. And if those things aren't there and they're only focused on one thing, which is just profit and loss, then this might not be the right company for you. And I don't want to, you have to hit your targets. Like promises made, promises kept is a mantra of mine and something that but there's more to a career than one of the things that I was sharing with somebody that they when I left Iovate and they said, hey, you had a huge impact on me as a person, and they said, well, what do you want to leave as your career? And I just said, the people that I worked with, if if I could be a top 10 manager or leader for them in their whole career, then that was I did what I said I was going to do, and I was consistent. I don't need to be number one, but if I can be a top 10, then I had a really positive impact on how that person, and the other thing is, as I'm in the later stages, you're not going to remember if you hit the numbers every year. What you are going to remember is, are how did that person impact my life and my thoughts? And so I'll never forget Doug Conan. I'll never forget Tom Muccio, two guys that had a huge impact on me. So I think it's totally fair game.
So I think we have time for one more question, so I'm gonna throw it out there. And this one was, you've worked at a lot of different companies. Do you have a favorite and why? Do you have a favorite company that you work for?
Um, I don't have a favorite, and I certainly, all of them were uh, wonderful stops along the way. All of them stretched me in different ways. When I left Campbell's, I was, 50, and we were, relatively financially secure, so I could take chances. And so it allowed me ability to say, I want to go work private equity opportunities. And private equity opportunities are like rolling the dice. Sometimes they work and it can be incredibly fruitful. Other times they don't work. And you don't get the gains that you signed up for. And the whole purpose of a private equity opportunity is to sell it or do an IPO and what I learned in those is how to do an IPO. What I learned in those was how to get a company ready for sale. And so it was a totally different experience, but one that certainly, helps me become a board member for a private equity firm and do that with a self of confidence because I know what's the process that needs to be done in both of them. So and this whole notion of a marriage is important for people to think about because when I started, my father worked at the same firm forever. Most of my friends' parents worked at the same firm forever, and that's okay. But if you want to grow, if you want to be in the movie and you want to continue to, be the best executive or best business person you possibly can be, sometimes you need to change and that's okay.
Well, Tim, this has been just such a joy talking with you today. Just an incredible opportunity for me personally. So I just want to say thank you from me because this is just um, been very rewarding. And thank you from all of us at Old Dominion for everything you do for us as a university, for our college. And I think everyone that's in attendance today, as well as that will be watching this video once it's archived and out there, is going to take a lot away from this to be able to reflect on and motivate their careers forward. So,
Wonderful.
thank you so much, Tim. I really
Well, I'm very
appreciate
committed to Old Dominion, and as I said, it was a huge part of my life, and I'm forever grateful for my time there and anything the university needs. If we didn't answer some of your questions, if they send them to you, send them forward, and I'm happy to write a response back.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, anyone in the audience, please feel free to send them my way. I will pass them on to Tim. And from here, we'll call it a wrap. And thank you again, Tim. Really
All
appreciate
right.
it.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
Take care.